All right, so I have a Traxxis 4M micro crawler. It's an 18 scale. It has a hitch and a trailer. And I'm gonna do a little bit of a tear down, show you some of the inside parts of the truck, and how to install that hitch, as well as a few other components to beefing up the steering and driveline. So, I mentioned we have a few upgrades to demonstrate. And essentially, what I'm talking about here is I upgraded the center motor, well, really the transmission, a long time ago to a low range gearbox. And when I did, it gave me probably doubled the torque coming down to the wheels. And the first thing that failed after I did that because of the extra torque was the differential up here just immediately disintegrated. I think I was driving up against like a small incline and it was trying to pop the front tire up, and it would have made it normally, but it couldn't make it because of the front differential just gave up on me. And so that's been replaced. When I did that, I replaced the rear differential as well. And then at some point, I let this get wet in like a creek with my kid. We were driving around and the axle up here rusted, and so I had to replace the whole axle. And in doing so, I ended up replacing not just the inner part of the axle, the drive line, but the actual housing that the axles are housed in. And so recently we were driving, and the still low range gearbox, the front differential has been upgraded, the axles have been upgraded. But when this car goes into like hard right, it kind of binds a little bit, and you can kind of see that now. Like, it doesn't want to push forward. If I use both my hands, I can get it to go. And part of that's due to the wheel bearings here are a little bit worn out, but the other part of it was just due to the all the metal, I'm assuming. And so my front drive shaft just broke right here at the knuckle. And so what you're seeing here is a fully upgraded configuration, but I've upgraded the drive shafts to be metal, so they have a bit more rigidity and can handle more torque. And then I'm also trying to address that binding issue. I upgraded the carriage for the servo right here to metal as well. So hopefully that's coming through on the camera. And what I'm going to show in this video is just how to get at the servo and replace that part, because it's not hard, especially if you've done something like this before with an RC car or crawler or whatever. But it's also not super straightforward, and they give you no instructions. They basically just give you the servo in a box, and that's it. That's all she wrote. So I'll show you how to do that. And then I already swapped this gearbox out, but I will show how to do that. The reason I can't actually demonstrate it in the video is because my screws are all stripped out and they need to be replaced. As you can see on the frame here, there is some residual rust, and the hardware that came with it is not stainless steel, and so most of the hardware that I have on this truck is rusting, and the heads of the screws are stripping out pretty regularly. So I do have on order a total hardware kit, stainless steel, and so at some point I'm going to do a total breakdown of this vehicle, or this crawler RC car, and break it down to the bits and bones, take all the pieces apart, and then put it all back together, and using stainless steel hardware, hopefully to give it some more longevity. And but this upgrade that I did earlier today, is a two-stage transmission, or two-speed transmission. See, I'll pull out the old one in a minute. The old one doesn't have this whole top part, this top part here. The old one only has the bottom barrel, and even that is a lot smaller. And the two-stage, it has a in the forward position a low gear, and in the back position a high gear. And the low gear, I got a video on this, or a video of it demonstrating this. The low gear isn't quite as slow, or isn't quite as low range as the low range gearbox that I had installed before. And the high gear is higher than the stock transmission in terms of total speed. So you don't get quite as much range of motion, but it's pretty good being able to just flip a switch. I think that's fantastic. I quite enjoyed that upgrade. Gives the car, or the vehicle, a lot more flexibility. So with that being said, I'm going to pause here and we'll get to the next part of the build. All right, so the first one I talked about before the video even started was actually I think these are hex head bolts. I've been using Torx heads, which is probably why I keep stripping them out, in addition to them being rusted. So the first thing I want to show you is just how to do the hitch, to install a hitch on this guy. Really quite simple. There's two screws that hold this hitch assembly to the frame, and they just pop right out. In the end of this, I will show this driving with the hitch on it and how it affects the departure angle. But the thing that I think is kind of funny is I thought, oh well, if that's a problem, then I'm like doing anything where I'm finding it to be annoying. I could just pop that off. Well, if you take this off, the body clip no longer works, so you can't do that. But the hitch is just two screws. This guy bolts right into the back of the frame, stock frame. So if you want to get a hitch and have a trailer to go with it, obviously it's going to hurt your departure angle, but for a toy, especially for my kid to keep him interested in playing with it, I thought it was a worthy upgrade. And so it takes about 30 seconds. So we'll just pop that back in there. Yeah, I wonder if that's why I keep stripping the heads out, is because I've been using Torx bits instead of just regular hex bits. That would probably do it. All right, so moving forward, to get at this, take the battery off. My battery's actually ballooning a little bit. Don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but that's not good. Means I'll probably have to replace the battery too. The gift that keeps on giving. So to get at the servo and replace the housing with a metal servo cage, the starting point for this actually is underneath the truck, in my personal opinion. Taking the steering, I've been calling it the steering knuckle. That's probably not the right word, but taking the steering knuckle off the steering linkage to make it free spinning. Now the wheels can go wherever they want. Turn it, and then the other thing that I noticed that made a pretty big difference was just taking the front tires off. Allows me to get to more of the parts and pieces a little bit easier. So I'll do that real quick. If you're trying to figure out what tools you need, that is a 5mm, I'm assuming, socket to get those off, and that gets you access to the steering rack. And then the last part of this, which I thought was super helpful, was to just take the whole front axle off, actually. And so to do that, there are the bottom of the shock tower, there are 2 screws, and you just pull both those guys out, and you'll see it just comes right off. Actually, it'll take 2 more screws, but I'll show you that in a second. So you take that guy, pull him out, take this guy, pull him out, and then so structurally the front axle is connected at 3 points, kind of 4 points, but it uses three of these screws to actually structurally hold the front axle on. So you have the 2 screws here that hold these lower control arms. I think control arms is the right term. We'll push those out of the way. And then on the other side, you've got, on top of the axle, you've got 2 more control arms coming in, and that give it that ability to pivot and everything, give it some flexibility, give it some range of motion. But this control arm here is actually what holds the entire servo housing together. Let's see which is the best angle to get to it at. Right here, you can see it. So there's the bolt, it goes through the servo, it goes through each of these control arms and through the servo housing itself. And that's what holds the servo motor on, but also gives that, what I'm calling a 3rd point of connection, even though it's technically 2 more strut arms. The axles are not structurally tied to it because they have to be able to flex, and so there's a little bit of range of motion there for the axles. And actually more range of motion than I would like to see. You don't necessarily need, I guess you do need that much. All right, let's get that lower one out. This one is on the upgraded kit, it has a nut and I'll show you that in a second. Same thing, 5mm, but on the stock frame, this is made of plastic, and that is not done with a nut. The plastic is just has a threaded part on the other side that the screw goes into. So when you pull this guy out, use my screwdriver here to push it through. Or not. Come on, little guy. There it comes. And so all three of these screws are not the same size. So the two longer ones go to the upper control arms, and the lower one goes to the two lower control arms and the servo housing. So once that's off, the whole axle comes right out, and as does the servo housing. The servo housing obviously is still connected because I have it hooked up to the battery and the wiring harness. I don't really want to undo all that, but for the purpose of demonstration, the servo is held on with two more screws. Let's see if we can get to it better. There we go. Put those over there. These screws are different than the stock servo cage because the stock servo cage has a deeper, because it's made of plastic most likely, I'll try and show you this on camera. These here are deeper on the stock servo cage. They come out probably about yay far, so they thread into the plastic. And on this one, they do not. And then on the stock servo cage, trying to remember the orientation, this side is also deeper because that screw, again, threads right into the plastic, whereas the upgrade kit comes with a nut that you can use instead, which is kind of cool. And so there's the servo cage, there's the servo horn. I'm calling it the horn. I don't know what the proper term here is, but the servo linkage that takes it from the servo to the steering linkage that goes to the actual tires, I also replaced, just made of metal. This one's a different size bit. It's one of the only things on the whole truck that's not the same size as the other ones. Don't know what the purpose behind that is. And it comes off the same way everything else does, with just a Allen screw, and then it just presses on here. The one thing I did notice, and that you'll probably have to do if you are looking at this and thinking you want to do the same thing, is the servo has when you power it on, has a default, centered state. So right now you're seeing it powered, like this is powered off, but if it were to come on, it would be in the same position. And so you want to center this horn on the servo gear, because it's got teeth on the underside, so that it's basically as close to straight as possible. And then you can fine tune it with the trim control on the controller to get it perfect. So that's how you get the servo cage off. Now I'm going to just put it back on. I won't talk as much, and we'll put this thing back together. So putting it back on, I find it easy to push this in here and then twist them into these holes here, and I did it backwards. The long part of the servo cage goes to the front. And while I'm looking at this, this is kind of interesting. It is tooled. It looks to me like it's CNC milled. I don't know exactly for sure, but it's got several degrees of several planes with different degrees of freedom. These holes here are threaded, so it has to do a tool swap to thread those holes so you can screw into them. And so that's kind of interesting that they would go through the effort to CNC mill a little accessory for this kit. It just tells you how well supported this is by Traxxis, and I actually really think that's quite nifty. You can replace almost every single part of this truck with metal if that's something that you're interested in, which is, I think, part of the fun of having one of these, is being able to customize it and tinker with it and break things and then go and fix it. It's a lot cheaper than breaking a real car, that's for sure. I'm taking the lower, or the upper, or these? I'm taking the wrong ones off. These are the uppers. no, these are the right ones. I'm taking the, I would think I was saying these backwards earlier. These are the upper control arms, not the lower control arms. These are the ones that go to the servo housing. I'm taking them off because I want to install it while it's on the, while it's disassembled from the truck. So that way I can put it back together easier. Real easy to put it in after the fact. Hopefully I'll demonstrate that. So these I'm just going to put over here. All right, so to put this all back together, the one part of this I think I'm just going to have to do is take the servo out of the wiring harness here. And then if you need to remove the battery tray, it has these teeth on either side of it, of this clip, and those feed into the channels on the inside of the frame, just as a fun fact. But to do anything motor or gearing, you have to pull the battery tray out, so definitely worth doing if getting in your way, which it was for me. Put that aside for now. All right, so here is the servo. The front part of the servo faces down and forward because it's got to connect to the steering linkage right there. And then from here, it's pretty straightforward. You're just going to put in the screws at the front and back. The metal servo housing kit comes with these new screws here, and they are pre-Loctite greased, which is much appreciated. Don't have to worry about it coming loose. And then for all this stuff, I don't ever do it very tight. I just do it kind of gently tight. And then I won't do the steering linkage until I get the lower control arms reinstalled. So to get those back in, show it from this side, because this is this is facing the truck, because there's your drive line. These are going to fit into the position here and here. And then somewhere in here is my through screw. And I said it was the shorter one, so it's this guy right here. And it comes in, it doesn't matter which side it comes in now that it's got a nut on the other end. But I'm going to keep the same orientation that the stock truck had for no other reason than I can, and I definitely picked the wrong size. 50-50 chance I got it wrong. It's longer because it has the thread on the other side. So a quick way to check if you're confused is just hold it up next to it, see that it goes past it. And there we go. And then the newest looking nut, where's my driver? Right here. It's going to go on the end of that. And then I found that you can just hold that with your hand and tighten it finger tight with the driver, which is convenient because I only have one driver. And the other thing that I thought was kind of funny is when I was taking this apart, it seemed to me like the servo mount pivoted independently of the front axle, but you can see there's a pin at the top where it rests, and then there's the through bolt at the bottom, so it can't move. So it is attached to that front axle, and that kind of makes sense, because why would it pivot when the whole point of this is for it to steer the front tires? It needs to stay, you know, geometrically synced up with the front axle in order to do that. So in hindsight, that makes sense, but when I was taking this apart the first time, I was like, I don't really understand why this is not moving. And then the last piece of the puzzle for the servo is just connecting the steering axle or the steering linkage to the servo. And you do that with this little bolt right here, which also came from the kit and was also pre-threaded or pre-Loctited. And there we go. I feel like that skipped. I've been having trouble with the hardware being whatever you call it. So there's I'm having trouble with the hardware slipping with my tools. So there is the front axle reassembled, ready to be reinstalled, and so we're just going to put these upper control arms, or lower control arms, actually lower control arms, the longer ones, in the grooves here, and then reattach the shocks. And so this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. feed the wire back through the top, feed that through, and then how best to show this on camera. We'll do the left side on camera, and I'll kind of pivot away from it. This one is going to get reattached, but it's easy to do at the end. Basically, and the one thing I thought that was pretty helpful with this is if you get lost and can't figure out what goes where, the short answer is look at the rear axle, because the rear axle linkages are set up the exact same. So, sorry, my hand's gonna block it for a second. There's a little ball joint in there that's kind of finicky to get. Oh, I'm doing this wrong, that's why. Hold on. The shock goes on the outside, so you can pre-feed that. Then it's the frame of the truck, or then it's the axle, and then it's the linkage. Linkage goes on the inside, and then you can feed it through. And then this is screwing into plastic, so as always, be careful with that. So you can hear it slipping a little bit on me. So I need to replace this hardware. Is just, I've taken this apart so many times, it's just worn out. And doing the reverse side, hopefully it's clear, easy to see. At this point, something that I made a mistake on, and you can see my mistake with that hole that's in the bottom of the plastic part of the engine cradle, is the getting at this. There's a screw that's on the inside of the, let's see if I can show it. Right there. There's a screw that holds the knuckle to the actual axle or to the motor. And getting at that screw when it's inside of this part was impossible with the bigger motor. With the old motor, it's smaller. You could, or rather the transmission was smaller. You could fit the screwdriver around it and get in there and tighten it up. But with the new one, I couldn't do it. So I ended up just drilling a hole here because I couldn't get the motor back off because my screws are all stripped up. And so getting that fixed is a priority of mine. And so the lesson there was feed your driveline while you have access to it. So for example, I feel like I did this wrong. Oh, that's right. Just being finicky. Oh, there we go. It might even be helpful to just put that through. Put that back in. Let me try that real quick. See if that'll help hold things together. All I'm doing is putting the, I called it in the beginning of the video lower, it's actually the upper control arm, screw back through to hold that in place so it could squirming around on me. And now I still have range of motion to go this way. I'm going to use this guy to pick up my axle connector piece, slide this onto the end of it. It's just slotted, it just has a T slot, or rather it's just a slot, it's not a T slot. I'm making this look harder than it is because I'm trying to hold it so the camera can see it. There we go. Once that's in there, then this one will feed in to the front. Quick check, if I turn the back wheels, the front wheels will turn as well, which is what we want. This guy's gonna have to go in its home at some point. So no time better than the present. Get him in there. I'm gonna go ahead and put the screw for him in there because the last piece of this is pretty simple. Slides in. This is also going into a plastic thread. So as much fun as it is taking this out and putting it back, taking it out, putting it back, I imagine there is a finite amount of life left in the thread in the plastic for me to keep doing that. So either that means I need to stop doing it, or I'm gonna have to suffer the consequence and pay for replacement parts if I ever strip the base out. last piece of the actual puzzle is the final screw to hold the front axle on. And this is where turning the wheel is helpful. If I could do it by hand. There we go. And there we have it. Aside from remounting the battery cage and just resetting the tires back on, that is a finished job. Just to quickly demonstrate that all is well, I will reroute this at some point in the very near future, but for now, put that guy back in there. And where's my battery? Turn my controller on, hook the battery up. So that's crawl gear. This is high gear. Same amount of throttle and full left, full right. So there you have it. The only other part of this that is worth pointing out is just the mounting the motor. So there are 4 screws that hold the motor on. 1, 2, 3 on this side up here, and then the 4th is down there. And this whole piece comes out. The drive linkages have to be unscrewed and then moved onto the new motor, and then it just plops right back in. Really quite easy to do. And then I do have a kit to install a brushless motor up here, and so that's going to be a bit more involved. I'm going to have to actually take the transmission housing into 2 different pieces and then slide it out and slide the new one in and replace the ECU. So that'll be fun to try and do. But that is not available today because my screws on my motor mounts are all stripped and therefore need to be replaced before I can take them back out and put them back in again. But hope this is interesting or helpful if you're stuck trying to figure out how to do this. Avoid this mistake, putting a hole in the frame of the truck, even if it's just the bottom, isn't the smartest thing in the world to do. But yeah, these little trucks are pretty cool. It's really neat how well supported they are. All right, new truck and trailer all hooked together, and the blue truck has the old gear and the new green truck has the new 2-speed transmission, and look how much faster it is than the old one.
I'm gonna knock you.
Same motor, just a little bit higher gear ratio. And then if I come over here,
Whoa.
swap it to low gear. Pretty easy to do. There's just a little selector switch right on the inside here. Push it to the front.
I want to go faster than yours. Me?
Now she's in a slightly higher speed, top speed than the old motor, or the old transmission, which was the true crawl gear, but still slower than the stock transmission goes. Yeah, you're gonna kick my booty with this new gear. Pretty cool. So it all works together, trailer and all. And then of course the real purpose of a crawler is to rock crawl. So this is a low speed gear. Let's see how much control I have without the brushless motor kit installed. So I'm having to apply quite a bit of throttle to get it to go over just a small little bump like that. So not as much control as I used to have with the lowest low gear set. But the fact that I can select it now makes me happy. And still plenty of control. These things stock have tons of control. Last thing I'll say is look at this departure angle. This is in the high gear, so I don't have any control with like crawling.
I tried to knock me off the track.
And it bottoms out.
I tried to knock me off the track.
Okay, buddy.